Kia ora koutou. It's a pleasure to welcome you today to our latest mobile expert interview. And it's really a great thrill for me to have Sally Schmall here with us today. She is an expert in expat career counselling and coaching, which is a subject that many of our clients have to tackle when they first come to New Zealand or when they're even thinking about taking a role here. How am I going to adjust and achieve my aspirations in the New Zealand career environment? So I'm going to ask Sally just to tell us a little bit about her background because she's a very interesting set of skills. She's an expat herself, so she really knows where she's coming from and talking about the subject. And then we'll have a conversation and draw out some insights from her. So Sally, over to you first.
Thank you, Bridget. I'm really happy to be here to talk with you. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, both professionally and personally, as you mentioned. So my career, I previously was the director for dual career services at the University of Michigan. And that was a program that oversaw the recruitment for senior faculty and executive leaders across 3 campuses and 75 different departments. In doing so, we created a formal program, one of the first 5 actually in the country at the time, and really established a systematic way in which we began working with not only candidates, finalists, but also their partners to help them think about how they might transition their career to Michigan, wherever they might be coming from across the world or across the country. And I really enjoyed doing that. Ultimately, though, I was negotiating on behalf of the University of Michigan. And what I found was that I really enjoyed working with partners as they made that transition, both before, during, and after, in supporting their overall career success. And so I opened Academy Coaching, which I ran for about 12 years in Ann Arbor, Michigan, with expats from around the world, helping them with that career transition before being tapped on the shoulder by Deloitte Consulting and moving into management consulting, focusing on leadership development and change management, and ultimately being recruited here to New Zealand in late 2019 to run the Deloitte New Zealand greenhouse. And so I too am an expat. I ran the greenhouse for several years and now have transitioned and am again have continued throughout that time working with individuals during their transition to New Zealand, as well as if they're leaving New Zealand, because as you know, unfortunately, we did have a bit of an exodus during COVID and lockdown when people needed to return to their countries of origin for a variety of reasons. And they needed that support to think about how to best position their capabilities, their skills as they moved back to a different country yet again. So I'm happy to be here today.
Great, thank you. And I'm here, Bridget Romains, as the founder of Mobile Relocation, really asking questions, I think, on behalf of our clients, the many people that we resettle from all over the world in New Zealand every year. So I want to start off by asking a really general question. What's the most common challenges you see expats facing when they transition into roles in New Zealand?
Yeah. Well, at first I think about people even transitioning into life in New Zealand, right? And although everybody's hopes, expectations, and needs are different, just from a general perspective, I was thinking about this. Firstly, it's the actual distance away. So you are completely removed from your professional network that you may have had, your community, your home. And while looking at a map, it can at times feel like a great adventure, and it has been. For me, it's been the Torah adventure. At the same time, it's a little bit different when you land here and you realize how complicated it is to get anywhere else. You can't just up and travel and easily go back home. For many of us, it's a 24-hour flight if you're lucky and there aren't any delays or layovers. So you have to be really intentional about creating your community, perhaps more intentional than you've ever been, both professionally and personally. I also think with the transition into the role as expats, we're transitioning into a new country, we're transitioning into a new community, a new home, a new language, a new way of living, a very new culture. And so oftentimes where we may have hit new roles and opportunities and just like hit the ground running because we knew what we were doing, now we have a cascade of new changes and challenges. And so one of the things that many people experience is a bit of an unexpected lag, a sense of fatigue, that they're not just getting it fast and excelling as quickly as they might have before. And that can feel quite overwhelming until people step back and realize they have made an entire world of changes, major changes, leading up to the move and after actually settling here in New Zealand. So being kind to ourselves and accepting that we need to be able to take that breather along the way is a common challenge that people experience transitioning into the role.
Absolutely. And I read an interesting piece of research the other day on the Holmes and Rabe stress scale. Relocation has the same amount of stress as a major illness. And when you think that's absolutely right, every domain in your life has changed. So it's not unexpected that it would be a tiring and challenging process, often to people's self-esteem. I find, they've come from being master or mistress of their universe in their home country where they have an established network, they're respected, they're known, and they come to New Zealand and they may have to perhaps learn some new skills if they're in a technical area, or at the very least just learn how to operate in an environment where they don't have those networks and backgrounds that they had supporting them in their career for the vast majority of their previous life.
That is really true, because I think that the difficulty is that most of us that are hired here are recruited for a specific skill set. And so you come with a level of expertise, and what you find in short order is that while that expertise is valued, it's also limited, because you really need to build the relationships with your Kiwi colleagues and um, not wait for them to reach out to you, but rather take that initiative to really understand the culture, the business culture, their expectations at the pace at which they expect you to move may be quite different than what you think your charge is. And what many people have found is that they think they need to come in and immediately start making changes. But if you step back and think about it, for many of our Kiwi colleagues, they have seen a bit of a revolving door. So, for example, in the role that I was recruited to, I was the fifth person in about 4.5 years in that role. So they're used to expats coming, doing and making a lot of changes, and then quickly leaving in maybe 12 months to 16 months. And so you have to really slow down and build the trust and let people know that you are here for the course of the duration. Maybe your duration is only 2.5 or 3 years. Maybe it might be longer. But you really want to be transparent with people that you're committed to understanding the business culture, the big picture, the unspoken nuances and expectations, and you want to understand how to best team with your colleagues who are here on the ground and they're staying. So how do you best team with them to make the impact that you believe you were hired to do?
I think you've touched on another really interesting point there, which, we're a country of 5 million people in New Zealand. Relationships are very, very important here. And often you can get a lot done on the power of a relationship and trust, rather than necessarily using a hierarchical structure or the way that you might be used to operating in a larger business or a larger country even. Do you have any comment on that, Sally?
I think it's really true. It's actually quite refreshing if you've come from a situation where maybe the hierarchy was so thick that you felt like you couldn't actually move the dial. It can be really refreshing to be here and be able to walk down the hallway and knock on the CEO's door and have their ear and be able to talk with them. But again, that reinforces why the relationship truly is so important. I think the other thing is recognizing that trust is huge. So part of that, we don't bring trust based on the credibility we were hired for. We build trust based on the relationships and the actions we take once we're there. And you can stumble along the way. And it's important to recognize those stumbles, to acknowledge them, and to seek a mentor within the business who can help you understand the Kiwi way of getting things done. I think a really important point is that while you may bring global knowledge, most Kiwis have done OEs. That's part of the growing up experience here, and it's really phenomenal. And many people have been all over the world to gather different experiences, insights, and expertise that they bring back here. And while you're valued for your international experience as an expat, you still have to be sensitive to the fact that you're often going to hear that's not how we do it in New Zealand. And there's real purpose and value behind that because everything needs to be New Zealandized or right sized. What works in London may not work for the exact same company here in New Zealand. And really being culturally sensitive and appreciative of that and recognizing that you cannot simply lift and shift your expertise, the way you moved initiatives forward, the way you developed successful business in the past. You can borrow a bit of that, but you need to really lean into the culture here to see where you find that fit.
Yeah, two great strategies you've mentioned. The one is finding a mentor, a New Zealand mentor, and the other one, being culturally sensitive and figuring out how to operate and provide your expertise within a New Zealand context. Do you have any other strategies that you recommend to expats working in a Kiwi business environment?
Now, I think one of the biggest tips is to recognize that really New Zealand is part of the Asia Pacific business culture. So that being said, it is often very conflict avoidant. And when I say conflict, as an American, what feels like conflict to me is quite different than what it might feel like within the Kiwi business environment. So within the Kiwi business environment, being too abrupt or what could be perceived as abrupt, too direct and transparent is oftentimes not valued as much as having those follow-up conversations. And one thing that many expats learn and talk about when they gather, and that's another tip, even though you need to understand and lean into the New Zealand culture, I strongly encourage people to also find an expat group when they land that they can relate to have these shared experiences professionally and personally. But what many of us have found is that yes does not mean yes. Yes oftentimes means I heard you and I'll think about it. So always, if you might have in the past asked once or twice for clarification or are there any unspoken concerns, now be comfortable asking several times to ensure you're not missing anything.
Yeah, we have a classic saying in New Zealand, yeah, nah. Yeah is the bit where you're thinking about it. Yes, I've heard you, I'm thinking about it, then no. But you don't always hear the no.
Yes, that's right. It's very true.
Yeah.
And if you're a person who feels that you need to act and move and push things forward, which is oftentimes it's a dichotomy, right? Because generally people who are recruited and hired here, they're in roles where there is some expectation of change and ROI. And if you think you're only going to be here for 2.5, 3 years, you might be actually putting additional pressure on yourself to really move things forward so that you can leave your mark. But the reality is that approach does collide with the New Zealand business culture.
Mm-hmm. Right. So we've talked a little bit about all the things that expats can do. Based on your experience of working in New Zealand, how do you think employers could do a better job of setting expat talent up for success?
Yeah, I do think there's a lot of opportunity to improve the transition and the overall success for expats. First and foremost, I think that it's important for a business to ensure that their HR, their recruiters, their leaders truly understand and validate and appreciate the numerous sacrifices people make to accept a role and make the move, oftentimes literally across the world to New Zealand. This is a sacrifice that they and their families have made. It's a tremendous amount of change. It's costly and it's very uncertain in today's times. So the risk level that people feel is quite high. I think validating that is important. Secondly, providing lodging for the first month is critical. People need to be able to get their feet on the ground and take a look around. When I came in, I was quite grateful that my employer gave me a month of accommodation near the office because one, I didn't have a car, and two, I didn't know how to drive. I'd never driven on the left side of the road before. So that was really helpful. And also they had a relationship with mobile relocation. And I'm not saying this just because you're interviewing me. This was really important to me. The time I spent with the realtor driving around was worth its weight in gold because I was able to see firsthand the differences between communities from one end of Auckland to the other. I was able to hear firsthand about how to navigate the rental market, which is very different than the United States, where I'm from. I'm not able to buy, we're not able to buy here in New Zealand on work visas, even as temporary residents. So you have about 7 years in the market where you will need to be renting if you choose to make your life here. And it's a very different experience and market than what you might be used to. So having that expert, it was crucial because really, when you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Safety, shelter, that's core. And so you need to have those relocation services. I think another thing that businesses can do is intentionally set up dinners between other colleagues and leaders with that new expat and their family. Involve the families. That makes a big difference because, again, families who have made these sacrifices and partners who have made these sacrifices, they need to see and have a glimpse of their partner's new world, their new employer, who they're working with. And it's a great way to start also expanding their own social contacts, learning about schools, learning about, different recommendations of where you go for what. Those things happen not through osmosis. They're through the conversations and being connected with other people. So I think that's an important part, is really having institutionalized dual career services and informal guiding people. Have you set up some dinners with this new person and their family? Have you involved them? And then again, managers having the confidence to check in and say to the individual who's accepted the role, how are you doing? How's your family doing? Have those conversations because that would be very endearing and helpful to the person who is working with you, and really important because if they're struggling or their family's struggling, they will not be able to bring their best self into the role.
Absolutely. And in fact, again, research shows that the most significant reason for people returning from international assignments or leaving the country again is actually nothing to do with work usually. It's factors outside work, like their children is unhappy or their spouse hasn't settled or they themselves don't feel like they've really settled into the local culture. So that's really interesting. That we spend a lot of time worrying about the fit and the person inside the office, and perhaps employers also need to be looking at what's happening outside the office. So you've mentioned spouses. I also be interested to hear, so many spouses who come to New Zealand are highly qualified in themselves and they're seeking fulfilling work here. What's your advice to them?
I think, first of all, ask your partner the moment they become a finalist in the search process, ask your partner to inquire with that employer about dual career services. Make sure you let them know and you're transparent that accepting that offer is contingent upon not only that role, but the successful transition for the rest of the family. And so seeking what services could be baked into the offer, right? So if the organization doesn't have an established partnership offering dual career services, they could still bake into the offer money for transition services and career coaching. And I can tell you from the side of the negotiator in dual career services, organizations, it's a drop in the bucket when they're going through a recruitment process to give somebody and to build in a sum of money that they can use for transition or career services. They are highly motivated to do it while the offer is extended. That excitement decreases the moment the offer is accepted. So you get what you ask for during the negotiation process. The second thing is, I think for partners, don't wait until you move here to begin your actual transition. And I know that's easier said than done because you're selling homes, you're putting things into storage, you're making a lot of changes for your children and your family. and whatnot. But I would be proactive in engaging career coaching services and learning about the business market here in New Zealand, how to best position your capabilities and your experiences to organizations here. Although we both speak English as a primary language between the States and New Zealand, there was a huge vocabulary dissonance between them. So we have to be able to speak the language for where we want to go. Reach out to people, let them know when you know you're coming that you'd like to have a Zoom informational interview. Really smart organizations and recruiters are always looking for talent. And so if they know you're coming, they want to hear from you and what you bring and have to offer. So I guess in essence, what I would say is start crafting your professional network before you get off the plane.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. We do the same thing. You know, LinkedIn is a great tool. Kiwis are very friendly. And one point I would add there too is that again, thinking about the New Zealand culture, going straight in and saying, I want to talk to you about job opportunities is quite threatening for a Kiwi because it's very direct. Whereas if you ask a Kiwi, could I come and talk to you because I'm new to town and I'd like to understand more about your industry, Kiwis love to help people. And you'll find if you buy them a coffee, you'll have half an hour of their time quite easily. And you never know where that will lead because you've established a nice relationship with somebody, and that's the way to get things done here. Now, I'd like to finish off here with a personal question. You know, you are an expat yourself. If you cast your mind back to arriving in New Zealand, what surprised you most when you arrived here?
I would say actually the difference in the language. Mm-hmm. So I was very naive. I assumed since English was the national, first language of both countries, that there wouldn't be a language barrier, and that made it feel quite a bit safer. I thought I'd be able to just jump in. And what I realized right away is that the culture is very rich and diverse. I mean, we have Te Reo Maori, we have English, we have Kiwi slang. Many of the Kiwi words and jargons were completely new to me. I actually ended up buying a book at the local bookstore called Kiwi Slang. And I would flip through it and look at it and go, oh, that's what they mean by boot. Oh, that's what they mean by this or that. And it still comes up today. I mean, last weekend, I asked my partner if he had finished his breakfast sandwich. And he's like, what sandwich? Sandwiches are for lunch. I'm having a breakfast pie. Well, from America, pies are for dessert after dinner. So there you have it. I'm still learning. And when you are learning a language and you've gone through and you're listening so much more closely and so intensely, and consequently, you might find that you're actually quite fatigued and wiped out at night. And it dawned on me about 2 months into my time here in New Zealand, I thought, what? I'm just worn out. This is not me. And I understood all the other big changes, but there was still, I thought, I'm listening so hard during the day to interpret the accents and the different terminology that I didn't anticipate. And I'm actually fatigued. Mm. So I think that was the biggest surprise to me. The part that I thought was going to be the easiest was not.
Well, I'd like to commend you because earlier on in the conversation, you dropped in a term which is only used in New Zealand, which is OE. When you were talking about New Zealanders, and that stands for anyone who's listening, overseas experience, which is the fact that most Kiwis in their early 20s will go off and work overseas, for a year or two and then return to New Zealand. And it's a unique New Zealand thing. We have a word for it, which, of course, anybody coming to New Zealand just wouldn't get. So that's
I didn't know. You're right. It's become ingrained in me.
Yeah, it's you now. Anyway, look, thank you, Sally. I don't know, do you want to add anything else before we wrap up? Any other pearls of wisdom?
I think the only other thing I would say is to really be gentle with yourself and with your family members. Oftentimes when I'm talking to people, I think they accepted the stress of what happens during the ramp up for a big international move. And somehow when they land, there's expectation that it just falls into place and that it should be smooth sailing. And it's a wonderful experience to have in an international relocation. The experience for you and your broader family will be something you'll talk about for years and years to come. But initially, when you get here, it's still a transition, and there are still losses and differences and navigations and new communities to create. So avoid, sticking within your cocoon, just amongst yourselves within your pod, and really create opportunities to meet other people in your neighborhoods, in your broader community, in your work settings. Get connected and have those relationships and allow those to bolster you and really create a new life here in New Zealand.
Great. Well, thank you, Sally. That's a perfect note to end on. It's been my pleasure to speak with Sally Schmall, who is an expat career coach and specialist. Her contact details will be accompanying this blog if anybody as an employer or as an individual expat wants to speak further with her. I'm sure she would be happy to hear from you. But thank you again for your time, Sally.
Thank you. My pleasure.